I'm Teresa Binken, CEO of National Speakers Bureau Canada and Global Speakers Agency. We envision that the sharing of ideas inspires action to make the world a better place through bringing you expert speakers and thought leaders for your conferences, sessions, and training programs, whether they be in person, online, or hybrid. And I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker. As a consultant at the intersection of technology, business, and ethics, Juliette Powell identifies the patterns and practices of successful leaders who bank on ethical AI and data to win. Juliette's research at Columbia University is informed by her work with organizations like Intel Labs, Microsoft, the United Nations, and the World Bank Group, where she's focused on the responsible deployment of AI, ethical leadership, and the search and removal of negative biases. Her live commentary on BNN, CNN, and BBC, and powerful presentations or hostings at The Economist, Harvard, and MIT emerged from her lifelong interest in community building, combined with a deep knowledge of what it means to be a connected society. She's also the author of 33 Million People in the Room, focused on the value of your networks. And she's here to join our network today and share her insights with us. Welcome, Juliette.
Thank you so much, Teresa. I feel so happy to be here today. I've been part of the National Speakers Bureau Network for, gosh, almost a decade now. It's incredible how time really flies, but certainly things have changed in the last year, as we all know. And so let's focus in a little bit on what we might be able to do about it. Today, I'm coming in from a lot of experiences in the last year, a lot of new clients that have taught me some new lessons, but also some old lessons and how to reimagine them in our current reality. And I must say thank you for so many people for joining in. I know that some of you are joining in from across Canada. Others are dipping in from the United States as well, across industries. You're all taking time. And whether you're at work or at home or in that in-between place, I hope that you're seated comfortably. And I want you to say merci d'être ici avec nous aujourd'hui. Thank you so much for being with us today. Now, we decided to focus on the future of work for this talk because changes in work are something that all of us have had to deal with, again, regardless of industry or where you're at. And certainly one thing that we all have in common, regardless of that, is our need and reliance on digital technology. I mean, I don't even talk about the AI data-driven centric business models when I mention this. I'm really talking about our day-to-day lives, both on a personal as well as on a professional level. I mean, every single day I have to go into my Gmail and I start typing, and invariably, no matter what the topic is or who I'm writing to, Google seems to know what I'm thinking better than I do. Right? The same thing happens when I go onto Netflix. Netflix seems to know what I want to watch before I do. Match.com, OkCupid, they all seem to know who I want to date before I do. All of these technologies have become so ubiquitous and have increased exponentially in their usage over the last year, particularly, that means that there have been also an increase of data breaches. And I don't know if you're like me, but I'm always wondering, what are people, companies, and governments doing with my data? What are hackers doing with my data? And why isn't anybody protecting my data better? Well, of course, I'm not the only one. This has hit the headlines multiple times in the last year. Data breaches from, everyone from Equifax to Google. There's even been those who are still using Hotmail that are kind of dealing with the consequences of using these old-fashioned tools. But for many people in the world, these are just new tools that they're getting their hands around for the very first time. Again, it's up to governments and individual organizations to really set the tone when it comes to leadership during a pandemic. And this is something that also needs to be addressed. I think that leadership on both sides of the border right now have so much to deal with that it falls to individual organizations. And the question is, in our search to make a buck, what are we willing to do? So we've seen multiple organizations that are willing to use our personal and customer data in order to sell to third-party organizations and to make a buck. In fact, when nothing else is able to be sold because your supply chain is broken, many organizations have reverted back to using your personal data and selling it. Why? Because they can, because there's no ownership around it. In fact, many business models are built on this. But there's certain organizations that have decided, because of all the controversy, especially in the last year, that they were going to write down their ethical principles. And so it's a great opportunity for organizations to bring their best people together, their best thinkers and all of their stakeholders to figure out what are the ethical principles that we are willing to stick to as we become more and more digital. And some might say, just as you might have read in multiple articles online, is that there's a whole lot of greenwashing there, right? This whole idea of we're going to put all these great ethical principles, but in the end, they're not enforceable. So yeah, that is greenwashing. But one thing that we don't see a lot of is organizations that are willing to say, no, these are the things that I am not willing to do to make a buck. And those statements, those are the powerful statements. The organizations that say, no, I'm not willing to sell customer data in order to make a buck. No, I'm not willing to transgress your privacy to make a buck. I'm talking about organizations like Apple, for example, who have really used it both as an amazing business model of something that can happen in the 21st century, but also have used it as a core principle of what they will not do. And so I encourage you to do the same. Yes, put out all the ethical principles about what you will do, but the most important ones, figure out what you and your organization are not willing to do to make a buck. Another lesson that kind of came up this year came through the Broad Institute. Many people might not have heard of this fantastic institution. They're based out of Boston, but you might have heard of some of the things that they've been able to accomplish. Back in the year 2000, the Broad Institute are the people that succeeded in sequencing the human genome. And of course, this was a huge deal around the time. It took billions of dollars, took over 25 years, multiple teams around the world. But the Broad Institute decided to use a technique of manufacturing called pull to be able to make it happen. And more recently, in 2020, when all of us were kind of smacked upside the head because the pandemic had hit, none of us were prepared, and most of us were isolated, kind of stuck there going, what the heck are we going to do? As if you recall, back in March of 2020, COVID testing was not easy. You had to have symptoms. Getting a result from a COVID test could take at least 2 weeks because there weren't enough facilities that were set up for these particular tests. And so the Broad Institute, even though they were very focused on sequencing genomes specifically to be able to detect the genes in the rarest of diseases, looked at the opportunities at hand. There was a demand, there was a need, right, for more COVID testing. They had facilities that were not focused on any kind of diagnostics, but they decided to take a leap of faith and go with the demand. And they reworked the way that they manufacture their products in order to scale up a new diagnostics arm. So the first month, right, in April, they managed to process 10,000 COVID tests in a month. That's pretty incredible. They went from 0 to 10,000 in 1 month. By the time they hit August, they were at 100,000 tests a month. Just this past February, they ramped up, they scaled up. Yeah, guess what that number is? 10 million COVID tests per month. All of this through simple manufacturing of pull. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar, I'll start with push. Push is when you forecast. You can figure out roughly what your industry is going to need, and so you pre-manufacture and you're ready to go, right? Except in times of uncertainty like we've been living in the last year, that kind of forecasting is very, very difficult to accomplish. The pull technique is the opposite. The pull technique says, don't manufacture anything, see what the need is. As soon as you are able to identify that need and come up with a solution, that's when you start changing your business model. Only when you have the business do you start creating it and customizing it for specifically for that purpose. By doing this particular version of the Broad Institute was able to use Pull and scale not just the number of COVID tests, they were able to scale their entire business 5x in a year. 1 year. Because they changed the way that they looked at their own business, they looked at their possibilities, and they looked at the opportunities around them. So it's really important to note that they were able to turn on a dime because they had that learning that they got from mapping out the human genome, right? So many organizations have been focused on learning how to predict. In this case, one of the biggest lessons has been learning how to turn on a dime to be responsive to opportunities. And the third big lesson that I learned this year, in the last year, thanks to my clients, came when one of my favorite clients of all time, the Cirque du Soleil, a Canadian-born company founded by Guy Laliberté, they have been working nonstop during the pandemic, even though no performances were permitted in any of the territories they serve, which is obviously for a global audience. They kept working. And when about 5 months ago, an international celebrity, and I'm not going to name this person, what I say is that she's been around for about 20 years and she's an A-list celebrity. And she's a big fan of Cirque du Soleil's. And she said, you know, Juliette, I would really love to work with these people. I would love to collaborate with these people. I've been dreaming about it for a very long time. And who am I to say no? Here's somebody who could perhaps collaborate with this larger brand and create something truly extraordinary. And I could be the deal maker. What an opportunity. So I get them both into a Zoom conference to have a first-time conversation, an introduction, if you will. And everybody is very relaxed. They're in their comfortable seats, hopefully in their favorite rooms. And it was fascinating to watch how two global brands can come together full of promise, full of excitement, and how things can really go down the tubes quickly. Part of the issue was that Cirque du Soleil was very straightforward in that they wanted to know straight up, why is it that you want to work with us? The global celebrity turned around and said, well, who wouldn't want to work with you? I've been your fan. I've gone to see all of your shows. I love what you do. My brand is this strong. Your brand is that strong. If we both bring these brands together, we will be able to take over the entertainment industry, right? Nothing will be able to put itself in our way. And she was convinced of this, and she was nodding, and she's used to being very, very persuasive. And I can tell you that she was definitely working it. Cirque du Soleil wasn't impressed, not at all. In fact, their next question was, well, if you're so excited about working with us, what is it that you've been doing in the last year during the pandemic to prepare for our collaboration together? Yeah, that's the question that very much stumped this A-list global celebrity. Her response was, well, I've been doing my homework. I've been looking at all of the different things that you've built over the 35-year history. I spoke to as many people as I could from Cirque du Soleil, former employees. I Googled you. I watched your videos. I mean, I think I understand your business model. What else could you want of me in terms of preparation before collaborating with you? And Cirque du Soleil reiterated, since March of 2020, we have been isolated like the rest of the world. But there's not one day that hasn't gone by that our performers haven't trained, haven't rehearsed, as if they were performing that night. So what I came to realize in this incredible reunion of mighty brands is that I guess my friend Tom would have been the one that maybe put it the best. He said, you know, we're all fish in the ocean. Hmm? When the pandemic hit, it was kind of like a tsunami. Everything was different. There was this huge wave, and all the fishes are getting caught up in this crazy wave. Some of the fishes got knocked out. Other fishes, they just kind of stood there and tried to swim, but couldn't swim, and tried to float and tried to just figure out which way is up. And then there are other fishes that no matter where up or down or around was, they just kept on swimming. And that is the lesson of Cirque du Soleil. No matter what happens, you have to bring your A game. And there seems to be, with the advent of the pandemic, from brands that are already considered the top global brands, an even stronger feeling that new collaborators have to be bringing their A game. Now, I'll give you another example in a completely different industry. I know that we have a lot of financial services and banking people that have asked to watch this talk. And so it would behoove me not to mention you. I was always a big fan of the big banks. I remember way back in the day when ATMs came out. Here was a form of technology that was, as far as I could tell, way ahead of its time. It was amazing. I no longer had to go in to see the bank teller. I could do things much quickly. It was far more convenient, right? The hours, the fact that it was always around the corner from where I lived, it was now in stores, it was in delis, it was everywhere. How fantastic. Cutting edge, innovative technologies created by the banking community. And this is what happens when you're at the top of your game for most industries, right? You hit a home run, and then you watch that ball go, and then there are all these expectations around you and what you're going to do next. Well, the banks proceeded to make a lot of money, right? But I'd be hard pressed today to think about a whole lot of technologies that are coming out of banking around fintech. Did the banks keep on swimming with the technology? Or did they become such great swimmers that at some point they let the incumbents that were coming from different industries into their waters? And now many of the banks are dependent on these fintech companies to be able to deliver all of our favorite apps, for example. So there's a lot of power in the idea of keeping swimming. Gotta keep swimming, gotta keep innovating, always keeping your eye on the ball, always moving ahead, always looking for those opportunities. And so if there are 3 takeaways, because Teresa loves when speakers give takeaways, they would be this. I would say, with respect to data, build up your business to learn how to optimize data. Absolutely, yes. But also learn how and when to say no. Decide right off the bat, what will you not be willing to do to make a buck? That kind of commitment, both internally and externally, makes a huge difference in perception and in trust. And those are 2 things that we all feel right now more than ever, as you know, we try to connect and communicate via these digital devices. Another great takeaway, at least for me, from the Broad Institute story, is the ability and the learnings to be able to turn on a dime, to be able to seize those opportunities, even if they have never been part of your business model before. Do you and your organization know how to turn on a dime? And if you don't, maybe that should be one of your top priorities for this week. No matter what happens in the future, you will always be ready. And finally, keep learning, keep growing, keep swimming. I have to say that, Teresa, I am thrilled to be able to share this with you, and I thank you so much for being here. I also want to thank the audience one more time. I think that ultimately those who figure out how to bring people together, both online and offline, in a meaningful way, a meaningful experiential way. Those are going to be the real winners, regardless of the industry. And ultimately, I'd say that's the case with everyone that showed up today. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Juliette. And I appreciate that note that you ended on, and the way that you shared your content in a conversational kind of style, especially in this era with a lot of information coming at us and in different ways. It was easy to listen to you and really take a few moments to think about what you were talking about. So thank you for that. We do have some questions coming in, so I'm happy to share those with you. There's one question about what key areas should we be considering when establishing ethics around data use?
So first and foremost, I think it's important to make the distinction between you as an organizational leader and you as a human, because you're asked to do that in your job every day. As we've seen, it's all the same person, right? So things that bother you as an individual, right? I don't want to sign up to this newsletter because I don't want to give my data, or I'm not comfortable putting in my credit card information because I've heard of so many data breaches. Well, try to think of those same states of mind when you're putting your organizational hat on, right? So there are many, many, many ethical principles that have been published by some of the biggest tech companies in the world. They're all online. You can pick and choose the ones that work for you. But ultimately, it's just window dressing until you decide what you are not willing to do. And it's when you make those things public and you stick to it that it really starts to resonate, I think, on an individual level, as well as an organizational level and a societal level. And that's where the real goodness is.
Excellent, thank you. And that ties into another question about how we're hearing about a move to Web 3.0 and decentralization and owning your own data. You've touched on it a bit in terms of what kind of decisions would individuals be making. Can you share a bit about where you see that going as more individuals want to own their own data?
Sure. I mean, I'm always I always think back to the way that the World Wide Web came together, right? There's this amazing physicist who had this idea, and ultimately he not only connected a bunch of physicists around the world, he also managed to create this wonderful thing called the World Wide Web that we all have access and opportunity with. Well, the gentleman in question has, in the last couple of years, come to the conclusion that the internet, the World Wide Web that he imagined, is not the World Wide Web that we have today because of many of the breaches and restrictions and so on and so forth. So ultimately, there is a new platform in the works that large organizations like Google and Facebook have signed on to, which will enable every user to be able to control their own data, meaning that you would have access to your own personal data store on this platform, which would then individually give permissions according to what you decide on who has access to your personal data, what personal data, for how much time, and for what purposes, giving the individual far more control. But there's a lot of way to go. And again, that is one way that all of this might play out. I know that in Europe, they're far more advanced than in the United States. And maybe Canada can help bridge the gap. I don't want to take up too much time on this, but I'd love to have a deeper conversation if you're up for it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. A couple more questions. We have a question from Nicolette wondering about the future of the workplace and your thoughts on how do you see the workplace developing in the next 2 to 5 years? Will people be going back into offices or home office scenarios? And I think especially as that speaks to community and connection.
So I'll tell you, back in 1995, that tells you how old I am. Back in 1995, I went to Thailand and I was on vacation and I met this amazing couple. The gentleman was American, the woman was Japanese, and they were writing code sitting on the beach. One was writing Japanese code that would translate to English, and the other was writing the opposite. They were working, one for an American company, the other one for a Japanese company. They were getting paid in US dollars and yen in Thailand. If you've ever been to Thailand, you know how far yen and US dollars go because it's very inexpensive compared to here. And I had a dream. In that moment, I thought, that's how I want to live my life. I want to be able to work on the things that I care about, where I feel comfortable, and be able to deliver much more. And it's very strange because here we are many, many years later, and this is the reality that we're all finding ourselves in. And I think that organizations like Google are really setting the tone, where they've come out, as have other organizations, saying, you know what, we're going to do a flex week. So, half the time you can stay in the office, half the time you can work from home. In some cases, you can just keep working remotely from wherever you are. And I think that it's going to really be up to each organization to better understand what works for their employees, and not just the current employees, for the next generation of employees, because those are the ones that are going to sustain you. So if we're talking about younger employees, hopefully more diverse employees that are, at least in university, right, they're all finishing their degrees on Zoom. So keep that in mind as you're making those decisions.
Thank you for that. I know some days I feel most focused when I'm sitting comfortably on the couch. So you can get the work done that way too. And there's another question asking about, given everything that the pandemic has taught us, can you speak to which industries you think need a big overhaul going forward?
So one of the clients that approached me in the last year is a professional services organization, and they have educated me on how far they have to come. So apparently legal is out ahead, and we've certainly seen a lot of headlines around the world where we're seeing more and more cases that are pled online via Zoom. Also, what are the implications of that? And there's a lot of them. So legal is a little bit ahead. Financial services are trailing behind, which is incredible because there's some facets of financial services that are using data on a daily basis. But there are many other places where, because they're billing by the hour, they're not necessarily using the technology as efficiently as they could. So I'd say in general, the industries that are less used to using technology and more used to using lots and lots and lots and lots of people, those are the ones that are going to be the hardest hit. And those are the ones that will more slowly but surely become more and more digitized. And so a lot of the stuff that I'm saying now might not apply currently, but certainly will apply in the next couple of years.
Got it. Thank you. And to me, that connects back with what you were talking about earlier with some of your key takeaways. Thank you. With having a mindset to look for opportunities and be able to respond quickly, as well as kind of having your own parameters about what you're willing to do and not willing to do. So thank you for bringing it all together that way. And we appreciate the audience and your questions. That's our time for today. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you hopefully in 2 weeks for our next session with a dual presentation with General Romeo Dallaire on benevolent leadership. Thank you for your comments. I can see excellent delivery, enthusiastic presentation. Thank you so much. Feel free to add any additional comments for the last minute or so, and hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks all.
Thanks, Teresa. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.